Oh man, this is something that I struggled so badly with for so many years, to the point where it was keeping me indoors and I was barely able to leave the house, because every single time that I would expose myself to the cold weather, it would induce an instant panic attack within me, to the point where I could barely breathe and felt as though I was close to passing out. And something else that I also picked up on every single time I went out in the cold was that my vision would start to become very blurry. The muscles in the back of my head and my neck would start to constrict and become very tight. The tips of my fingers would start to feel ice cold, and my hands would start to turn a deep purple colour with these patches of bright orange, and all round they would just feel really numb. So mentally I would always feel extremely uneasy, and my first thought was always, how the hell do I escape this situation ASAP? But physically, I also observed what I deemed to be fairly unusual and abnormal characteristics that my body was portraying in response to being out in the cold weather. And by the way, these ways that my body was responding to the cold weren't always present with me throughout the entirety of my life. It first started just over 8 years ago when I was given a triple round of IV antibiotics whilst in hospital. And I'm guessing a similar thing has happened with you, where you've been involved in some sort of event that appeared to trigger the onset of your cold intolerance. Something all of a sudden happened to your body, and consequently it's left you in a state where you're finding it increasingly difficult to actually function day to day, and no amount of extra layers that you apply to your body are sufficient enough for you to be able to handle the cold weather. So one of the first and most important things that I want to discuss in this video is that your severe intolerance to the cold, whilst it might be at the forefront of the problems that you're looking to solve, isn't something that you should be directly focusing all of your attention on. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Well, my own tolerance to cold weather environments only improved as an indirect consequence of me addressing another underlying dysfunction that existed deep down within my body. Once that issue had been addressed, me being able to handle cold weather environments much better was simply one of many positive side effects that all occurred alongside one another. So when I say don't address the issue directly, what I really mean by this is don't come at the problem by adding more and more layers of clothing, or by gradually exposing your body to colder environments and expect that solution to work for you long term, because it won't. I personally believe that what's happened to the vast majority of us out there is that we have suffered some form or some degree of neurological injury, and what that's done is it's impaired our body's ability to effectively self-regulate a number of variables going on internally, and that includes our ability to successfully thermoregulate. In my case, following a neurological assessment, it was discovered that I was experiencing neuronal hyperactivity in part of my brain called the pons. And one very significant thing that came about as a result of this was that my unconscious respiratory rate, which is a rhythm that's set in part of our brain called the brainstem, increased considerably. So without me even knowing it, my body was unconsciously hyperventilating, causing me to blow off excess amounts of carbon dioxide. And when chemoreceptors in the body start to sense lower than ideal amounts of carbon dioxide, they signal to vasoconstrict blood vessels in order to retain whatever carbon dioxide is left. And the reason why all of this ties in with not being able to handle cold weather environments is because as soon as your body senses being in the cold, it instantly shunts blood towards your internal organs and away from the periphery, so your limbs, your muscles, your joints, and any other extremities. So if your body were to already respond in this way whenever you were exposed to the cold, but then you were to add in low levels of carbon dioxide, further constricting blood vessels, what that would then go on to create is an internal state where blood would really struggle to be effectively mobilized around your body. The excess vasoconstriction present in your peripheral nervous system would heavily impair blood flow to your limbs, causing your hands and feet to feel especially cold and numb. But also, much more importantly, is the fact that you could have constriction of the blood vessels in your neck, actually cutting off blood flow up to your head and subsequently your brain. And as soon as cerebral hypoperfusion occurs, which is basically just another way of saying your brain being starved of fuel, it will instantly put you in this very panicky state where the only thoughts that will cross your mind is, how can I get out of this situation as fast as possible? So if you're sat there watching this video now, just thinking to yourself that maybe I just have an irrational fear of the cold and that all of this is in my head and that I can overcome all of this on willpower alone, I would just take a moment to reflect on the feelings and sensations that your body is signaling to you and the purpose behind why these might be occurring. You might want to be a little bit more measured with your approach before fully diving in head first. And that's why I really recommend checking out the Unbeatable Blueprint online course. This is where I teach you in depth about what it takes to identify hidden dysfunctions that exist within your nervous system, and more importantly, how you can address them to allow your body to better self-regulate for the long term. Now, I personally believe that there are two fundamental steps that we must take in order to be able to handle cold weather environments far better. Firstly, we need to stabilize the activity of our inbuilt neuronal networks so that our body can start to function more in line with how it was originally built to function. And then what we want to do is gradually condition our cardiovascular system through exercise so that blood can be pumped around our body far more effectively. But the important thing to note is that these steps must be carried out in that order. Firstly, step 1 and then step 2. Otherwise, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up stressing out what is already a hugely overwhelmed and exhausted body by adding in unnecessary additional exercise. So step 1, stabilization of neuronal activity occurring within our brain and neural networks. How do we go about doing this? And why is this so crucial when it comes to being able to handle cold weather environments? Well, the reason it's so important is because without you even being aware of it, your body is continuously taking on board sensory information from its environment on a momentary basis. And how the body actually decodes and processes this information then in turn determines how the activity of our autonomic nervous system behaves. The autonomic nervous system being the network of blood vessels that supply each and every organ and tissue with a continuous source of fuel, which comes in the form of oxygenated blood. If there are breakdowns in neuronal communication existing within any part of the pathway between when sensory information is detected and then how it's processed by the brain, then what that's going to end up causing is our body to not be able to effectively and efficiently adapt its internal state to match the changes that occur within our external environment. So what you really have to do is find ways of optimizing the function of your machine in here so that it can far better deal with challenges that it faces out there. And if you are able to bring accurate, consistent sources of sensory input into your brain, then in turn your brain will fire consistently accurate outputs into your autonomic nervous system. And then what that will end up resulting in is appropriate constriction and dilation of blood vessels, which will allow you to be able to handle a much harsher range of temperatures and be able to be out in these temperature environments for a much longer period of time. And the type of practitioner who was able to help me to achieve this was a board-certified chiropractic neurologist who, after performing an extensive physical and neurological examination, was able to pinpoint the precise area of dysfunction existing within my nervous system, and then prescribe me with very targeted neurological exercises that I had to consistently carry out in order to gradually correct that dysfunction. And then as we strengthened the weak signaling, or the area of hypotonicity existing within my neural networks, I was gradually able to transition into introducing cardiovascular exercise into my daily routine. And that really took my recovery to the next level, and I was able to handle the cold far better. So my advice to you, if you are somebody who's really struggling to handle being in cold weather environments, is to straight away ditch all of these simple hacks and all of these one-size-fits-all solutions and start to become more strategic with your approach towards how you actually deal with this. Optimize the function of the neural pathways that are responsible for delivering sensory information into your brain, because what that will end up doing is stabilizing autonomic activity throughout your body, and then consequently, as a result of this, your body will find it much easier to be able to adapt efficiently to any changes in external temperatures. It isn't an easy fix, and it does take time to observe the full benefits of it. But what I will say is the satisfaction that you get from building your body into a far more resilient one than what it currently is, and doing it in a way that is 100% natural, without any reliance on any foreign substances, is just one of the most rewarding feelings genuinely that I've ever experienced. I would just like to point out one very important thing at the end of this video, and that's that for two separate people with cold intolerance, the location of their dysfunction may well be different to one another, regardless of if they experience a similar set of symptoms, which is why I highly recommend having the function of your nervous system thoroughly assessed in order to be able to isolate the region of the problem that actually needs addressing.